All right, so this will go pretty fast. It's pretty simple. But what I found for most people is that they just buy a lot of brushes because you're hoping that the magic is in the brush. And I'll tell you that the brush is only about 10% of any of it, right? It doesn't, I mean, I see people use their hands. I see people use weird credit cards. I see people do anything that they want to make a mark on a surface to get some sort of thing that happens that renders something that looks like something. So, but I see people all the time think, oh, I don't have one of these brushes and I need this brush or that brush. Now here's another funny thing, is that I paint not only in oil and watercolor, but when I teach in oil and watercolor, this continually happens. When I teach in watercolor, I only use 3 to 4 brushes, is all I think I only own 4 watercolor brushes. 2 rounds, a liner brush, and a big flat wash brush, and that's it. Hi. And so, but when I go to teach, I get people in watercolor and they show up and they got their little watercolor palette, and then they have this thing that looks like, it looks like a big giant barrel or a big, big roll, and they just roll out 4,000 watercolor brushes. And I'm always looking at it going, oh my Lord, how many watercolor brushes do you have and why do you need all those brushes? And when I teach in oil, I use probably 30 oil brushes, and I get a class and they show up and they have 3 oil brushes, 2 of which are rock hard and 1 only has 1 hair left in it, but there is 1 hair, so we're keeping it and we're going to use it. And I'm not sure where this thing shows up in people's brains, why the difference is. So when I'm oil painting, and probably I would say the same for acrylic painting, is I try and use numerous brushes of different sizes, but I use a warm and a cool, or a light and a dark of each. So I usually have a light warm color and a light cool color, and I have a dark warm color, dark cool color, and I try and keep those brushes separate so that my paint doesn't get too muddy. So I use a lot more oil or acrylic brushes than I do watercolor brushes. So I'm not sure what the philosophy there is. In watercolor, you're always dipping in and cleaning the brush right off anyway, so you don't need very many watercolor brushes. So let's just go now through what the difference is between sort of wide, and so what the difference is between the different styles and types of brushes. And the most annoying thing that I find is, because all of our brush racks that are out there, and every art store has this, all the brush racks say on them, oh, for oil and acrylic, for oil and acrylic, oil, acrylic, and watercolor. And for the most part, most brushes are good for all of that. But I will tell you that I wish that they would specify more that these are oil brushes, these are acrylic brushes, okay? So here's the main difference. There's only 2 types of hair that you're gonna get. One is synthetic and one is natural, okay? Natural hair comes from all types of animals and is actually hair, and so it's very natural. The rest of them are all oil byproducts from the petroleum industry, which is either nylon, rayon, plastic, or some sort of rubber. They have these little weird rubbery brushes that you can use now too. So the difference being, a synthetic brush looks hair. If you take the single hair, it looks like this. And if you take a natural hair brush, a synthetic single hair brush looks like that. It's just a strand of plastic with no grooves, no marks, nothing in it. A natural hair brush has all these little things that are called, I think, cilia or something. They're little follicles that are in the hair, little grooves that are cut in. And the difference being that the paint that goes around here on a synthetic brush just wraps around the synthetic brush and it just sits on the outside of the hair like that. On a natural hair brush, like this, all this paint goes into the grooves down in here, and it grabs inside those little cuts and little cilia, and it grabs more paint. So natural hair brushes will hold 2 to 3 times as much paint as a synthetic haired brush. The other difference is, a synthetic haired brush not only doesn't have very much paint on it, this paint comes off readily and quickly. It just falls right off. On a natural hair brush, there's twice as much paint on there, and therefore more paint will come off. The problem here though is, on a natural hair brush, if you're on a very slick surface, like gesso boards, if you're painting on very smooth, slick surfaces, or even like smooth watercolor paper, the paint does not want to release from this brush, okay? And it does want to release from this brush, but you don't get as much. So somewhere between there is actually the perfect brush, which they don't make. But the whole key behind the brush is, a brush is a really, really, if you think about it, a very delicate instrument, okay? It has to be of a certain quality that it will pick up paint and hold paint in the end of the brush. So this hair that's here needs to be able to attract paint to it and hold on to paint. But it has to be weak enough that it lets the paint go when it hits a surface, okay? And if you don't have that combination, that's where it gets frustrating. And so each hair, all these nylon hairs are all different. The difference really between these nylon hairs is stiffness. Not one is more absorbent than other, and not one holds more paint than others. They all grab and release the same. They just have different stiffnesses. Some of them are very, very soft, and some of them are very, very stiff. The softer the brush, the more blendy you will get. So if your brush is really soft to the touch, you're going to get very soft, blendy, soft edge marks with not a lot of thickness to paint. The thicker, the stiffer the brush hair is on a synthetic brush, the stiffer the mark's going to be. You're actually going to get drag in the paint. You're going to get a mark that leaves a mark and will not give you such a soft edge. Okay? And then again, so now it's really all about surface. Depending on the surface you have, the rougher the surface, the more the paint wants to release. Okay? So if you're painting with a synthetic brush on a gesso board, you're going to get very, very transparent, very, very washy, nondescript marks. Because the surface is so smooth, it doesn't want to take the paint off the brush. There isn't a lot of paint on the brush. If you're painting with oil on a rougher type canvas, which is why some people say paint on linen, because linen has a whole, the weave and the weft on linen is very bumpy like this. So you get a lot of bumps. That drag will pull that paint off. And so you'll get a lot of paint that gets left behind on a rougher surface. If you're painting on general canvas, like the canvases that we sell out there, if you want heavier marks on your painting, especially if you're painting in oil, what I'd suggest to you is that you take a piece of sandpaper and just go once over the surface of the canvas just to open up the tooth a little bit. It's a little more grabby and it's going to give you more solid marks. Okay, so here we got two different kinds, and I just listed here a whole bunch of whatever animals that all these paints are made, all these hair, they're all basically the same. These ones like goat and horse, and like this is squirrel hair right here. They just really take squirrels and give them haircuts and use their hair. Goats and horse hair, all of those cheaper ones, they're fine. They hold a lot of paint. They're great for a lot of watery substances. So you'll notice that a lot of Chinese brush painting, they use Tahishu brushes or these hake brushes, goat hair brushes. Because these hairs, they're very inexpensive, they're very cheap. They hold a lot of water. They will not, the reason they don't use them for oil paint is because they're super floppy. So as soon as you get them wet, they flop, right? And they get, this isn't wet enough, but they'll get very bendy and floppy. And so they don't hold a lot of body to them, but they're great for washiness. So if you're doing acrylic, these cheaper goat hair brushes are great for washes in acrylic. They're inexpensive, they hold a boatload of water, way more than the synthetic ones. They're half the price as the synthetic ones, and you can do lots of washy stuff with it. So if I was in acrylic, I would start with a goat hair brush like this to do all my washes, and I would move towards the end to a bristle brush that would give you more thicker texture. That way you're painting, thick over thin, and you're gonna get a lot more texture out of your paint. Now these will hold a boatload of water too. So I'll tell you the difference here really comes down to between synthetic and synthetic and natural hair brushes. I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try. Okay, so this is a synthetic brush here. So I put water on it, and I don't know if you can kind of see that. It doesn't go as dark as I thought it was going to go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the mark I can make with a synthetic brush. This is the same size brush in a sable brush. And so I can easily get about double out of that with the same brush, because this brush holds that much more water. So this brush, you know, this brush it'll make a pretty long line and then it runs out. This brush will make a very long line and another long line and another long line. So you're going to get much more use out of this brush. Now I know a sable brush is way more money, but here's the thing. This will outlast this brush 3 times as long, and it holds 3 times as much water. So you're dipping less, you're running less, you're using it less, so it's going to last 3-4 times as long as this, and you're going to get much better coverage out of it instead of going back and getting choppy with your marks. So having a good sable brush in your arsenal, even for acrylic, is good. Now I know acrylic does wear out natural hair brushes quicker than the synthetic ones, because the fact is that the synthetic brush, working with the synthetic paint that acrylic is just, again, synthetic oil, synthetic, what do they call it, like a petroleum byproduct. It's plastic, really. Acrylic is just plastic, and these brushes are plastic. They do last a long time, but if you want to get wear and tear out of your brush, get 1 or 2 good sables. The other thing I would say is too, so if you do this, you guys actually have to come up here to see this part, sorry, because I can't walk around and show you this, but you might want to bring that up here and just show this. But if you guys come right up here, I just want you to stand around here and look at this for a sec. Now, I don't know, so here's the difference again between a synthetic brush. Okay, so a synthetic brush, if I put this in water like this right here that you're going to use for acrylic or oil, it does absolutely nothing, right? Because it's just surface, okay? This brush right here, the other thing, I didn't actually mention this, but this little thing right here, this little hair that I was showing you here that has all the little groovy bits on the outside, it's also hollow on the inside. Okay, this is the part where, don't show this to the boss, whatever you do. Okay, so the inside of these hog hair brushes are hollow. So what happens is, if you take this brush without what they call charging it, you're gonna dip into your paint, you're gonna mix up this big puddle of paint, you're gonna start to go and then you realize, oh, my paint's all gone. I didn't actually have as much paint as I thought. And why is that? Is because all of the paint went inside the brush because the brush is empty. So until this brush is fully charged and loaded and ready to paint won't come off. It'll keep going in the brush till it's saturated, then it'll come off, which is this. So before you use your brushes, when you first start to paint, you should do this. Dip them in the water, or dip them, in this case, this is an oil brush, so I'm gonna put it in odorless thinner, but watch how this brush will suck that up. Can you see that?
Oh, yeah.
You might need to get another brush.
It's okay.
And whatever, but you see that? So it sucks all of that up. So what's happening is when you're dipping into paint, if you haven't sucked it up, you're sucking all that paint into the brush. And then what do? You go wash out your brush. What happens? All the paint washes out. You've wasted a boatload of paint in the beginning. And that'll do the first 3 times you use this brush till it's charged. So I tell you, when I first start, I dip my brush in here, and then I just take it and I top it off, then I go into my paint. Same with the synthetic brush. Dip it in the water first, get it all charged up, then put your paint, put your brush into the paint. You're gonna save a pail of paint. Honestly, you will. All right, so these are hollow. That's why these hold a ton of paint. It's hollow, holds a boatload of paint, and will release a lot of paint. So this is what's called, so now I should say this. They talk about a bristle brush versus a synthetic brush, or a lot of brushes, especially if you go to Home Depot, they all say bristle brush. Well, here's the thing. This is a bristle brush. All bristles are just hairs on a brush. This is what's called a hog bristle brush, okay? This is the best thing to paint oils with because it will hold the most paint and it will release the most paint. So there's 3 kinds of hog bristle brushes. There's the what we call the El Cheapos, which are made from a hog's bum. So they basically just grab a pig and shave his bum, and it's very rough, very coarse hair, but it's super cheap. It wears really well. They're great for underpainting. They're great for big fat areas. So you can buy a hog bristle brush like that. Those what they call chip brushes or barbecue brushes are made from the back of a pig. Those you can buy for $3 or $4. The hairs all fall out. They continually fall out. They never won't fall out, but they'll do lots of coverage. They don't last forever. They're cheap. You can throw them out. They have a secondary kind that's made from the outside of a pig's ear, which is a little bit more expensive. They're nice, but they're not called flag tips. They're called just regular bristle brushes. And they're nice. They're good for everyday use. But if you want a good bristle brush like this is made from the inner ear of a pig. Deep inside the ear, the hair that's in the ear is very coarse. It's very stiff, very rugged, and it wears very, very well. Now what they do is, sorry, I shouldn't say they do this. The mid-grade brush, they have what they call a forced flag. This has got a flag tip, not a forced flag. Here's the difference. Oh, I'll just use this. So on this hair, like I showed you, it had those little cuts in it. On the end of this, when you go to the pig's ear brush, there's a little hair that goes like that and one that goes like that, and that's each hair. So if you pull this hair off and look at it, on the end of it, it looks like a split end. You'd look at it and go, oh, I need better shampoo, oh my God, it's horrible. No, this flag tip, what it's doing is, sometimes there'll be 2 flags, maybe even sometimes 3 flags. What that's doing is that there's 1,000 hairs right here that are split into 3. There's 3,000 hairs on the end of this brush, which makes it perfect for softening edges as well as laying on paint. So if you take care with the brush and use it properly, you can get a very, very delicate soft mark with a good brush like this. These flags are very pointy. So the cheap haired brushes just look like that. The cheap hog, this is a cheap hog. The middle grade one, which they call a forced flag, what they do is they take all these hairs once they've clipped the pig and got all the hairs, they put them in a big round thing, and they have a little machine that comes along, goes bonk, and it hits it, and it forces the flag, so it splits the ends. But what happens on those is, the split ends ones do this. And they get bonky like that, and they curl around. They are there, but they won't give you a softer edge. So you buy that mid-grade one, and I think it's a waste of money. The cheap ones are good for backgrounds, the expensive ones are good for painting. This middle grade one, I don't like it. It's a waste of money because it doesn't do anything for you. It'll do the washy stuff, but why pay that much money for washy when you could buy cheap washy? And it won't do this. So I say this is why I'm a big advocate of good, expensive bristle brushes, because you don't need a lot then. You don't need 37,000 brushes, you only need 4 or 5 good brushes. So the HJ Blue Handle brushes are my favorite, or the Princeton Dakota brush is a very good brush too. But there are lots of other cheap brands out there that you'll find, you'll say, oh, this is $17. Oh, this other one's only $9. Don't waste your money, go buy a chip brush. I'd rather you spent $3 on a crap brush than you did $9 if you're not gonna buy the $17 brush. Okay? The problem now with this brush, the bristle brush, which is great for oil or acrylic, is that this brush doesn't like water. So it'll work in water, you can use it in water, but if you leave it in water, because of this hollow center, it fills up with water and this brush will bloat. So it gets really fat, it opens up and goes, bleh. And so after about 20 minutes of use with this in the water, it loses its shape. When it dries out, it'll go back to shape again. So these brushes, the synthetic ones like this, you can leave these synthetic ones in the water all you want and they won't do anything. When you're using a bristle brush with acrylic, use it in the water, but don't leave it in the water. Clean it out and take it out and it won't bloat on you. And these brushes are fantastic with acrylic too because they will give you a thick, strong, very bold brush mark. Whereas these will give you less bold, they'll give you flatter, softer edged marks. The softer the hair, the softer the mark. The stiffer the hair, the bolder the mark is going to be. All right? Okay, you can sit down. Just stand here, I guess. So I'll just go over a few of the different shapes now with you and tell you another little secret that I have that nobody will ever talk about. So there's basically three shapes in brushes. I'm not going to talk about the craft brushes where there's stipplers and deer footers and whatever. I mean, there's 80 million craft brushes that you can buy to do fancy florals or whatever. We're not talking about that. We're going to talk about basic brushes. So the first two we're going to talk about is there's something called an F and a B, a flat and a bright. Flat means that the hair is very long, very flexible. A bright is very short and very stiff. Okay? They're here's two brushes, exactly the same size. These are both number 6s. These are both number 6s, and you can see how short the bright is, what they call a bright. Some people like bright brushes. I don't like them because they leave a very stiff, choppy brush mark. And it's because it's stiff. Again, what I said, stiffer the brush, the choppier the mark, the more hard-edged your mark's gonna be. I like a flat like this because there's lots of flexibility to it. I actually didn't grab one, but they have a long one called an Egbert, which is even longer. So if you want really juicy, flowy, like voluptuous, curvy brush marks, you can use an Egbert. They're very hard to control, but they do leave very luxurious marks. I like a flat because of this flexibility that's here. So I have the choice to push very hard with this brush, or I can use it to use the flag tips that we talked about very softly to get a very soft edge. If I need a softer edge on something, this brush will do both of those. Okay? This one's a little stiffer and will leave a choppier brush mark. If you want chunky, short, chunky strokes, then go ahead and buy a bright. I don't like bright. Now some people will now say to you, here's what they call, this is called a filbert. The difference being that this just has a tapered round end on it, okay? So some people will tell you, oh, get filberts, they're great because they give soft edges, Well, I'm going to tell you now that after about 3 uses of this brush right here, these edges start to wear a little bit and you will get sort of a filbert out of it and you will get a soft edge. You can control this brush to make a soft edge. This, yes, will give you a soft edge, but here's the difference. So these two brushes are both number 8s right here. And so if I do this again on this piece of paper, here's the mark I can make with a synthetic number 8 right there. And if I buy a filbert brush, there's the mark I'm making. So for the same price, I'm buying this brush, which is the same size as this brush, but it only makes this mark because it's tapered. So I've spent a whole bunch of money on this brush when I should have bought a 6, because a flat 6, if I take this flat 6 here, which is half the price, it makes the same size mark.
That brush is good for if you're painting trees.
This filbert?
Yeah, no?
I don't know why. What difference does it make? What's it gonna do?
If you are painting trees, what's better brush to use?
Flat. I just use a flat. So I'm going to get to that in a sec. That's actually a really good question, but I'm going to show you how to manipulate your brush. Okay? So it really is less about the style that you're getting as it is how you can control your brush to make a brush mark. And I'm getting to that in a sec. What I'm getting at here, folks, is that a filbert brush, because of its tapered, cuts the size of the brush mark down in half. You might as well buy a number 6 flat rather than a number 10 filbert, and you're going to save a pail of money. It's crazy. I don't know why they do that. I don't know why people buy filbert brushes. I just don't understand it. They all say, oh, it makes a soft mark, it makes a soft mark. Well, I can show you how to make a soft mark with any brush. That's not the issue. This is, for all intents and purposes, this is half the size and it's already a worn out brush. Why do you want to buy a brush that's already worn out? Get a brand new brush and wear it out yourself. This is crazy. I don't know why we even sell them, but I sell more filberts than I do everything because people think, I can make a soft mark with this brush. It'll have softer edges on it. Well, that's hooey. I say that's hooey. All right. So to get to your point then, let's just back up and see where we're at here. 2 kinds of brushes, synthetic. We got synthetic and we got natural hair. Natural hair is going to hold more paint, release more paint. Maybe going to be a little bit more expensive for some of them. Okay. Synthetic doesn't hold a lot of paint and will release everything all at once. Okay. But that's okay for certain things. The stiffer the brush, the chunkier the mark, the thicker the paint's going to be. The thinner the brush, the softer the hair, the more washy it's going to be, the more soft edge it's going to be. Okay, everybody's got that? All right. So here's the part that most people don't get is, I see people in class all the time buy a brush and then they paint with it. And what they do is they stick the brush perpendicular to the canvas and they paint with this flat edge right here and they try to make a mark, which is where the filbert comes in, because this flat will make a very blunt mark, whereas the filbert will make a very sort of softer edged mark. But the whole point is you should never use your brush perpendicular to the canvas. That's the worst mark you can make. It's going to leave a very blunt, choppy mark, and quite often, I don't know if you see this or have this problem, you go to make a paintbrush mark, you drag the brush down, and when you pull it off, it leaves a little dent at the end of it where there's a little blob of paint. And you're like, ooh, I don't like that, and you want to scrape it off, or then you take your brush and start doing this to soften it, which just smushes the brush mark around, and now you've got mud on your canvas again. So, how do we solve that problem? Well, the first thing is try using the brush closer to up and down to the canvas, not perpendicular to it, right? So the more you tilt this brush, the softer the brush mark's gonna be, okay? This is gonna leave a very blunt, acute brush mark. This is gonna leave a medium brush mark. This is gonna leave a very, very soft brush mark. So think in terms of this. So you wanna know that you can go down and do this with the brush, this, I don't care which way you go, but as long as you're not doing that, you're gonna get a much better brush mark. Okay, so what that basically says to me is that you could go almost 365 degrees with this brush any direction you want. You don't always have to go down. People just get in there and start doing this, and here's my door, and here's my window, and here's my tree, and everything's this way. You gotta learn that you need to go this way, and this way, and this way, and this way, and don't put your brush this way. That's the first thing, right? The second thing is, I bet you can see this better if I did this. Maybe. Okay. The second thing is, you can use this brush like this, but it also turns 365 degrees as well, okay? So if you want to use this brush, you can use it like this, but if you turn it a quarter of a turn, you can do that with it, and then you can do this with it, and you can do this with it. So this brush is going to make those 4 marks very easily, because all I'm doing is now rotating it this way. Right? And so as soon as these edges start to wear out, when you rotate this brush, you're going to end up with a very soft mark. And you can go from a fat mark to a skinny mark back to a fat mark very quickly with one brush by turning it. And nobody seems to want to twirl their brush, but if you twirl it, you're going to get some crazy good edges. You also remember that the minute you start doing this, all the paint that's on this side of the brush came off, but the 2 sides and the back side still have paint on it. So what do? You go, oh, here, I got some paint. And you go, oh, I'm out of paint. And then you go into here, you clean your brush off, you go to another color, you've just taken 3/4 of the paint and put it in your thinner pot or in your water. But if you were to do this and go, here's my tree, so I'll go out 1, 2, 3, then I'll do a couple of side ones, then I'll flip the brush over and I'll make a few marks here, and then I'll use that other edge like that. All of a sudden, you can make a tree, and you've used all 4 sides of this brush and taken all that paint off, and you've saved a pail of money, but you've also got some very interesting marks now because you're spinning this. So not only am I doing this 365 degrees, but I'm doing this 365 degrees. That just made me have about 35 more brushes that I didn't have to buy, because 2, 4, 6, and 8, pretty much all I ever use in a bristle brush, and I can paint everything with those brushes. The only other brush I really need is I will use a round, because sometimes I do want to draw a line or get in with a little point, little corners of the eyes. Maybe you got a few grasses that you need to make, so I'll use a round brush for that. And the only other brush I use, and I don't know why I didn't grab one of those either, but a liner brush. So what they call a liner and or a rigger brush. Here's your difference. There is a difference between the two. A liner brush looks like this. A rigger brush looks like that. So we don't sell an awful lot of rigger brushes anymore. The name rigger brush comes from the boat industry, where when you were painting boats, you had to do the rigging on a boat, which is all the lines. So they would make them in various sizes so that those line widths, you just buy the right brush for that size and you'd put a rigger brush on there and do that. That's fine. You can, for all intents and purposes, a liner brush was just pointing will do anything a rigger brush will do if you push hard enough and leave it to go flat. It will do the same thing, but a liner brush is very long and they're almost always synthetic unless you buy pinstriping brushes, in which case they'll hold a boatload of paint. But a liner brush is that long for one and only reason is because it needs to hold enough paint, because usually you're doing a lot of long skinny lines and you need enough paint to come off that brush. Okay, so that's the only reason. And some people say, oh, I don't like liner brushes, they're too hard to control, they're always so floppy. Well, yeah, so is a giant weird golf club that you've never used before until you practice with it, and then you'll say, oh, it's now my favorite club in the world. So you get used to it. I love liner brushes, I use them all the time. I use a pointy brush, but everything else, I just use a flat brush, and I'm always twirling it, twisting it, and I'll give you another tip. If you want fancy, funky color in your paintings and paintings to pop, don't overmix your color on the palette. Try mixing the color more on the canvas than on the palette. So you go like this. You take you take blue, you take green, yellow, and you mix the two together here so you get some sort of smudgy green starting. But you can still see the identity of each color. You can still see a little blue, you can still see a little yellow there. And when you get up on your canvas and you start doing this, and you go this way, and then you turn the brush and do this, they will start mixing. They will have a little bit of their own identity, but they will also turn green. And that will give you what's called broken color. It's absolutely beautiful. It'll set your painting off, and that's so you don't overmix on your palette. Right? You got to get some kind of mix. So you get the blue in there, you get the yellow in there, you kind of smudge it a little bit till it starts turning green. But don't keep mixing till it's pure green and then put it on. Let a few of those of the DNA of each color show through. You're going to get wonderful, vibrant colors in your painting then. Right? Does that all make sense? Am I saving you money yet? I'm hoping to save you a little bit of money so you'll go buy brushes now and spend all your money.
Another question. How you save your brush? How, because if you painting like few paintings, 3 paintings, this brush is not good.
It's getting stiff?
Yeah.
That's the end part, which we're at. What do you like, all super smart or something? We're at the end. How do you clean a brush? Okay, so couple things to note when you're cleaning brushes. First of all, if you're buying, well, any brush, doesn't matter, but hog bristle brushes especially, I don't ever wash my hog bristle brushes in water at all, ever. They don't tend to like water, and if you wash them in water, and especially like even synthetic, do not wash them in hot water. Tepid, just room temperature water is good enough. Maybe just slightly warm, but don't use hot water. What happens when you use hot water is it throws the bristles off a little, and they do that, and you end up with this brush that's dry, sitting in your bucket, and it has that little knurl on the end of it. Nothing more annoying than that, because it's going to make a crappy mark that you're going to hate. Okay, so stay away from hot water. All the synthetic brushes you can wash in water. We have the most amazing brush soap I've ever used in my life that I had a guy I worked with a soap guy to develop because I found this brush soap sort of worked and this brush soap sort of worked. So I took them all 3 brush soaps and said, can you take this part of this part of this, and this part of this? And he did. And so he's made a phenomenal wonderful brush soap that he has now found out that works for so many good things. He's actually marketing to garden industry now, and it's taken off. He's now got a full-time job making soap, and he started out making soap because his wife is allergic to soap, and he had to make non-allergenic soaps and laundry detergent. So he started doing that, and now he's got this whole business going on. And so he's a friend of a friend that said, oh yeah, that guy makes soap, whatever. And so I asked him about soap. He made the best. Actually, what happened was I was helping his sister paint, and when I left, I used some soap that was on her sink, this black soap, and I'm like, what is this? This is the most amazing soap. Oh, my brother makes soap. Anyways, I went to him, and he put a little pumice in it, and a little of this and that, and some lanolin so that it keeps your brushes nice. If you don't want to buy the brush soap, the next best brush soap is shampoo. Shampoo works fantastic. I mean, it's good for your hair, it's going to be good for brushes, it's fantastic. So, do not use hot water, use warm water only.
What's the soap called that you have?
O2, well, Swinty soap, but I think right now, because we haven't bottled it again or put it in the thing, but it's called O2, gardener soap.
We call it Swinton soap, but
But we haven't, we just have to rebottle it again or put it in, we have these little black holders so that the puck will fit in there so that you can brush it and hold onto the plastic thing and not waste your soap. So it's good, but as I said, shampoo is good. Don't use hot water. I don't wash I oil paint mostly. I do not wash my bristle brushes in soap and water ever. As a matter of fact, my brushes, for the most part, sit in my Turk pot 24/7, 365. They just sit in there, and I just pull them out and reuse them. Until my Turk pot is dirty, I have to clean it. Then I will wash my brushes out and I'll clean them with fresh dirt. So there's two problems to what people do to their brushes that cause them grief. The first is, especially with oil painters, is they will wash their brush out in thinner, but they're washing it in dirty thinner, then they wipe it off and they let it dry. And that dirty thinner has enough pigment in it that it makes the brush stiff. Right? And so your brush gets all crusty. You have to clean it. You can clean it in dirty thinner, that's not a problem. But the last thing you do before you're done is dip it in clear thinner and just wipe it off. So that all those things suck up that last little bit of clear thinner, it'll evaporate and your brush will be fine. Okay? Same with acrylic. If you're gonna wash them in clean water. Okay? The second and most important thing to do when you're cleaning the brushes is nobody cleans down by the end of the ferrule right here. They just go like this, jiggy, jiggy, jiggy. Oh, no more paint's coming out, great. They don't realize there's still paint all downside this ferrule. And of course what happens is your brush starts to dry and get crunchy here, so that then this becomes so stiff you don't like your brush anymore, because a quarter to half your brush is rock solid down there because you haven't done it. You need to bend your brush like that. Get right in there and do not be afraid to bend the brush, okay? And bend it so that that pigment comes out of the ferrule that's in there. This brush hair goes right down to there, okay? It doesn't end right there. It goes down to here, and there's actually a band here, and then there's glue to there. All that paint is getting in there, and what happens is it starts to dry, it starts to move up. So if you're not gonna get in there and bend it like that, you're gonna get a stiff brush. If you clean your brushes properly, I'm telling you, you will save a pail of money. And I know, at the end of the day, when you're done painting, and you hear that beer in the fridge calling you, you're gonna go, whatever, I'll get back to my brush. I'll clean them later. I'm gonna, whatever, I'll paint tomorrow. And then you don't paint tomorrow, and then you forget. And I'm the worst for this for outdoor painting, is I'm so tired and bug-ridden. I wrap them up in plastic. I'll get to them. Sure enough, 4 days later, I have crusty brushes, and I'm so annoyed with myself. Just take that last couple of minutes and clean your brushes. You will save pails of money, and you'll be very happy because your brushes are a very delicate instrument. They're going to work for you. So yes, clean them.
And after clean, what are you doing? I rub.
Yes, so afterwards, what I do is I take an old deck of playing cards or a business card.
Thank you, so sorry about this.
I do. So, if your brushes start to get out of shape and are doing this, okay, I'll give you two tips. The first tip is if you have watercolor brushes or round brushes and they're splaying out like this and you can't get them to go back, steam them. So what you do is you take a kettle and you just put steam on them and hold them over the kettle for about 1 minute till they get nice and hot and warm. And then what you do is dip it in sugar water. So like 4 tablespoons of sugar in a little thing of water, so it's like sugar water. What's gonna happen is when this dries, the steam will take it back to shape. When it dries crusty hard, but it glues the brush back together again. And then when you go to use it, when you put it in water, the sugar just dissolves again and you have a perfectly shaped brush. Okay, so round brushes, you can do that. You can steam them, especially synthetic, or not synthetics, any natural hair sables. If your tip starts to bend on you like that, you can just shape it with steam and then dip it in sugar water. And it'll hold. Once that sugar water dries, it's training your brush to go back to the position it should be.
And you put the sugar in.
Yeah, I put like 3 tablespoons of sugar in. I mean, I'm like super saturated sugar water so that when it dries, it's crusty. That's basically, if you've ever bought, sometimes out on the shelf, we'll put brushes out by accident, but you'll get a brush and it feels stiff and you can kind of crack it and it breaks open and all this dust flies off. That's sugar water. That's all that is, okay? For your, yeah?
So is that hot? Like with the sugar water?
It'd be warm, enough to dissolve the sugar. It should be dissolved in there, right? And then you just dip it in, hold it in there and just make sure it's shaped properly, and then I just set them on the counter till they dry overnight. Then they'll be stiff, you'll touch it, it'll be crunchy again, but that, as soon as you wash that off, the brush will be shaped back to the way it should be.
If your brush dries crusty and kind of halfway, is there any way of making it better again? Like
Yes,
fixing it?
yeah, we have Winsor Newton brush cleaner out there. It'll get your brushes back to about 80%, 80, sometimes 80, depending on how bad it is. I've had them come right back, but I've had some pretty nasty brushes that I can get back to 80%. They're great, good enough for me for underpainting anyways. Maybe not for my final stuff that I want, but I'll get them back from, you know, being clunk, clunk, clunk to, oh, this is brushy now, right? So that stuff, and it'll tell you, I leave it in for 15 minutes, I leave it in for a couple hours. I just stick all my brushes in there, and some of the paint will come off inside the thing. I don't care, I think my thing is like dark gray now. It's got so much pigment in it, but I just keep reusing it and reusing it and reusing it. And it works fantastic. So it'll bring old brushes back. For your bristle brushes or your flats, if they're misshapen, same thing, you can sugar water it, but I do this. I take an old playing card or a business card, and I just put them in here like this with a paper clip on it. And that will flatten it out. Now, be careful, you don't want to squish it so much that your brush ends up getting flat and doing that, right? So you just want to get it to the nice shape that it is. Open up your paper clip just to hold it on. So I'll do this with my brushes, and I'll have 20 or 30 of them once a year. I'll have 20 or 30 sitting on the sink, and that'll bring them right back to perfect shape again. They're like brand new. You will love it.
So they have to be wet.
This is wet. This isn't, but this I just if it's that bad, what I'll do is I'll take the Winsor Newton brush cleaner and I'll scrub it around, and I'll do this till all the paint comes out. Use lukewarm water. I'll use the brush soap. Take everything extra off. Shake the excess water out. I just set that on with a paper clip, and I'm done. That's going to keep your brush really, really nice and straight and square, and you'll have a very good brush again. You'll get more mileage out of your brush than you ever thought. Now, if your brush is like a millimeter high and rock hard, I use, the best thing for that is over there in the back, that silver thing's called a trash can. I use that and get rid of them. Don't hang on to those crappy brushes. Oh, it's still good, there's one hair on it, I want to use it. That's going to cause you more grief, because what's going to happen is you're going to muddy your painting, you're going to make dirty marks on your painting, you're going to end up using more paint. You'll use so much more paint than you would have if you just paid for a brush. Don't use your crappy brushes. Get rid of them, get new brushes, get them good, get them nice, treat them nice. If they're just crusty down near the bottom, try the Winsor Newton brush cleaner. You can get them to come back, straighten your brushes, and keep them nice. If you keep your brushes nice, they will treat you nice. Every one of Swinton's brushes comes with a free painting inside of it. It's just up to you to use the brush to find out where it is. It's somewhere around 11 or 12 paintings, and then this free painting pops out that you'll really like. I promise you. You'll call me and go, oh, my free painting came out today. I'm so happy. All right, questions?
What's the best way to clean brushes when you use oil?
I just use Gamsol. Odorless thinner, that's it. I do not wash them. Some people will tell you, oh, go to the sink every time and wash them. And if you're using bristle brushes, don't wash them in water if you can help it. I only do it once a year just to clean them up, and then I do this with them.
Is that little container thing with the ring, is that?
Yeah, that's absolutely the best.
Okay.
So I have 3 of those. So I have a big one that I use for when I'm painting, and that's my swishy, muddy pot that's dirty, and I just get my brush and take the excess color off, and then it makes a new color and I paint. I have a little mini one that sits right next to that big one. That's the one I use to dip into to mix into my paint, because there's no pigment in it, right? My dirty one is so filthy that if I mix it in my light colors, they turn muddy. So I don't do that. So I have a little fresh one there. I also have a medium-sized one full of fresh thinner. So at the end of the day or the end of the week when I'm done painting, I use the dirty one to get all the excess pigment out. I wipe it off till it's done, and then I just use the fresh one to dip in that's clean. So it's sucking up only fresh thinner in there, and I just put them away and leave them.
How long can you leave them in the dirty one?
I don't know, because some of them have been in there for 2 years, 3 years. I leave them in, Ryan, you go downstairs, Ryan will attest. I have a pot this big and there's 35, that's so full I can't jam another brush in there. So usually what I do at that point is I come to here and I use the big pot that's here. And so if you notice, the big pot is on the table there. You can clean your brushes in there, but afterwards, down below beside there is a clean pot with only fresh dirt. I take all my brushes and I dip them in that before I go. So I can leave those brushes in there, honest to God, I've left them in there forever. It doesn't affect the glue, the heads don't fall off.
What's the difference between turpentine and an odorless mineral spirit?
Okay, turpentine is distilled from sap of a pine tree. So it's highly toxic, very smelly, great for headaches if you like headaches, you can have headaches. I cannot understand looking back, like my mom used to paint, and that's sort of where I learned to paint, but she'd paint in the kitchen and it would stink to high heaven. I look back now at pictures from art schools in the 50s and 60s, and you know, there's 30 people in art class and they're all got easels and they're painting and they were all using thinners, and I couldn't imagine that now, how stinky that was. I mean, I just went to, 2 years ago, just before the pandemic, I went to Alaska, and I went to a bar in Alaska where they allowed smoking, and I haven't seen smoking in a bar for how long? I don't smoke, but when they had smoking in a bar, it didn't really bug me, but I went in this bar, and one beer and I was out. I'm like, good God, how smelly is this? We used to put up with that? That's crazy. But now, okay, so white spirits and turpentine, they're all basically the same. They're distilled from the sap of a pine tree, and though it's a natural product, it's highly toxic to the body, and it stinks and it evaporates to high heaven. Odorless thinner. So what's really happened is where this odorless thinner came from, literally, here's a funny story for you, is a guy in Prince Edward Island oil paints. His brother worked for Revlon in Chicago in a makeup factory. And his brother went to the makeup factory on a tour to see what his other brother was doing. And they were showing him how they made all these, you know, here's how we make eyeliner and lipstick, here's the lipstick machine, here's how we tube it, and all of this. And they were saying something about that all this makeup is oil-based. And so the oil painter brother said, well, if it's oil-based, like, what are you using to thin it with, and how can you put that on your face? Isn't it toxic? And you go, oh, no, we use this stuff. Like, it just has to be just slightly more, have more strength than the oil paint so that it'll thin it. Sort of like water. Water is a thinner, right? And so it doesn't have to be toxic to thin, but here we've been using kerosene and turpentine and all these things to thin paint for 400 years. Why? Because that's just what we did. Nobody realized it doesn't need to be that strong. So this guy took that product back to Prince Edward Island and formulated it so that it became odorless and non-toxic. It's the same stuff they're putting in your makeup. So whatever you're painting with oil paint now is the same stuff that's in your makeup. And so Gamsol, very much the same thing. So Gamsol now, they used to have something called Taltine, which was a Talon's product, which was, they called it an odorless thinner as well. But it wasn't. What it did was it had oil that came to the top. Same with that terpenoid. The oil comes to the top and floats in the top and stops the stuff from evaporating. But every time you stir it up, it breaks the seal and it will evaporate. Gamsol does evaporate, but it evaporates at about 1/3 the rate of water. So it evaporates slower than water. So if you leave a cup of water out and you see how long it takes to evaporate, this would be twice as long, at least, that it would take. So I say to you, there's very, very little fumes coming off of anything that's in Gamsol. Anything that's in your oil paint that you have is almost all natural anyways. So there's very little left in oil paint that's toxic. There's far more toxic stuff in acrylic paint now than there is in oil paint. All the formaldehydes and all the defoamers and the antifungal agents that are in acrylic and all the polymers that are in there have far more chemicals in them. Now, I'm not saying they're bad for you, but there's more chemicals in an acrylic paint than there is in an oil paint. Oil paint is almost about as natural as you can get. And so this stuff, so what I do is I leave my brush just sitting in there all the time, but I do put a lid on that, right? I don't want it, it is evaporating, so I just stick a lid on it, and I have 3 pots and I have 3 little lids, and I put them on. I paint pretty much 3-4 times a week anyway, so I'm always using it, but I put a lid on it. Otherwise, honest to God, my brush is just sitting there all the time. I've never had a problem with any of them. And by doing that, if you keep it pretty full like that, keeps this ferrule part nice and clean too, so your brushes feel fairly clean the whole time, right? And having a clean brush and using a nice, everybody tries to grab their freshest brush because they like it the best. Who wants to use a dirty old crusty brush, right? So if you keep your brushes nice, you're going to be able to use them a lot longer. You're going to save a pail of money. And now you're not going to buy any funky weird shapes that you don't need because you're going to learn how to use your brush. And all that money you're going to spend on canvases and paint better paintings to sell and make even more money to spend on more art supplies. All right? Okay, that's it. You're free to go. Any more? You got questions, sir? You got any more questions? All right. That's it. Now, all brushes, whatever you need, if you want them just for today, just for you guys, 20% off. So if you do need a brush, now's the time to grab one. Or brush cleaner or brush anything. Anything brush, I don't care. If it says brush anything, I don't care. All right.
Thank you.